Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The elevator doors parted to reveal the sleek interior of Portland's newest rooftop restaurant. Marshall Kane stepped out, tugging at his collar as he followed his wife Blair into the space. The restaurant buzzed with the chatter of well-dressed guests, all gathered for Blair's baby shower. "Stop fidgeting," Blair hissed without turning to look at him. "My boss is here." Marshall dropped his hand. "Sorry." Blair's pregnancy had transformed their relationship in ways Marshall hadn't anticipated. What should have brought them closer had instead widened the gap between them. Blair had thrown herself into planning this extravagant shower, obsessing over every detail while barely acknowledging his existence. The restaurant featured modern furniture and a panoramic view of Portland's skyline. Tables laden with expensive gifts formed a half-circle around a throne-like chair where Blair would sit to open presents. Marshall recognized the arrangement from the dozen Pinterest boards Blair had studied. "Marshall!" His mother-in-law's voice sliced through the ambient noise. Dina Harrow glided toward them, champagne flute in hand. "You're late." "Traffic was," Marshall began. "Whatever," Dina interrupted, turning to her daughter. "Blair, darling, you look radiant. Everyone who matters is here." Marshall watched his mother-in-law's eyes sweep over Blair with approval before settling on him with thinly veiled contempt. 5 years of marriage, and Dina had never warmed to him. In her eyes, he was perpetually inadequate, the construction worker who had somehow snared her ambitious daughter. "Marshall, make yourself useful," Dina said, gesturing vaguely toward a corner. "Help with the gifts or something." He nodded, grateful for the excuse to step away. Navigating through clusters of Blair's co-workers and friends, Marshall noticed how conversations quieted as he passed. These were Blair's people, PR executives, marketing directors, social media influencers. Since losing his job 3 months ago in a company-wide layoff, the divide between Blair's world and his had grown even wider. Near the bar, he spotted Reed, his younger brother, nursing a beer and looking as out of place as Marshall felt. Reed's presence was unexpected but welcome. "Didn't think you'd make it," Marshall said, clapping his brother on the shoulder. Reed shrugged. "Figured you might need backup." "That obvious, huh?" "To me?" "Yeah." Reed took a pull from his beer. His work-clothes jeans and a button-up with the sleeves rolled to reveal forearms stained with engine grease stood in stark contrast to the designer suits around them. "How are you holding up?" Marshall sighed. "Been better. Still nothing on the job front. Nothing permanent. Some consulting gigs here and there." Reed lowered his voice. "And how's things with the Ice Queen and her mother?" Marshall glanced around before answering. "About what you'd expect. Blair acts like my unemployment is a personal insult, and Dina keeps suggesting I'm not trying hard enough." "Bullshit," Reed said. "You busted your ass at that company for 8 years. Not your fault they decided to restructure." Before Marshall could respond, the sharp tap of a microphone cut through the room. Blair stood at the front, radiant in a pale blue dress that accentuated her pregnant belly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she scanned the crowd. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this special day," she began. "Before we start opening gifts, I want to thank everyone who made this possible. My amazing team at Evergreen PR, my friends who've supported me throughout this journey, and of course, my mother who organized this beautiful event." Marshall listened, waiting for his name among the acknowledgments. It never came. Blair continued, her voice taking on a strange edge that made Marshall tense. "And while we're at it, let's not forget my jobless husband's birthday." The room fell silent. Every head turned toward Marshall. He felt blood rushing to his face as Blair's words hung in the air. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes held something cold and satisfied. Marshall rose slowly from his bar stool. "That's sick," he said, just loud enough to carry across the now silent room. "Oh, stop overreacting," Dina snapped, stepping toward him. "Always making everything about yourself." "I didn't say a word about my birthday," Marshall said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Not one word." Dina's fingers suddenly twisted in his hair, yanking his head back with surprising strength. Marshall stumbled, caught off guard by the assault. Her face contorted with barely contained fury as she leaned in close. "Stop embarrassing her," she hissed. Then he was falling, pushed with both hands. Marshall felt a moment of vertigo as he toppled backward over the balcony railing. There was a collective gasp, a flash of sky, and an impact as he crashed onto a table one floor below. Pain exploded through his body. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Dina's face peering over the railing. Not with concern, but with annoyance, as if he'd simply spilled a drink. Beeping machines pulled Marshall from unconsciousness. He blinked against harsh fluorescent lighting, trying to orient himself. A hospital room came into focus: white walls, medical equipment, the antiseptic smell. Pain throbbed through his leg, and his head pounded with each heartbeat. As awareness returned, so did the memory of falling, of Dina's hands shoving him over the railing. "You're awake." Blair sat in a chair by the window, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up as she spoke. "What happened?" Marshall asked, his throat dry and scratchy. Now Blair did look at him, her expression a mix of irritation and something else, calculation, perhaps. "You fell from the balcony. Broke your leg, got a concussion. Doctor says you'll recover." "I didn't fall. Your mother pushed me." Blair set her phone down with deliberate care. "That's not what happened, Marshall. You were upset about something I said, which was just a joke, by the way, and you lost your balance. Everyone saw it." "That's not true." "It is." Her voice hardened. "Mom told everyone you've been drinking. They all believed it. Why wouldn't they? It makes more sense than my mother assaulting you in front of 50 people. Marshall tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his body. "I hadn't had a single drink." "Well, that's not what people think." Blair stood, smoothing her skirt. "The doctor will be in soon. I have to get back to work. This little incident disrupted a very important day, and I have damage control to handle." "Damage control," Marshall repeated flatly. "Your mother pushed me off a balcony, and you're worried about your image." "Stop saying that," Blair snapped. "You need to go along with the accident story. Do you have any idea how this looks for a family? For me? I'm 7 months pregnant, and my husband causes a scene at my baby shower." Marshall stared at her, really seeing her for perhaps the first time in their marriage. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the person he'd fallen in love with years ago. Or maybe she'd always been this person, and he'd been too blind to see it. "Get out," he said quietly. "Excuse me, get out of my room." Blair's face flushed. "You need to think carefully about how you want to handle this, Marshall. If you start throwing around accusations." "I said get out." A nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by his raised voice. "Everything okay in here?" Blair instantly transformed, her expression melting into one of concern. "Yes, thank you. My husband is just disoriented from his fall. Could you give us a moment?" "Actually," Marshall said, "I'd like my wife to leave." "Now." The nurse glanced between them, sensing the tension. "Ma'am, perhaps it would be best to let him rest." Blair gathered her purse, leaning down as if to kiss Marshall's forehead. Instead, she whispered, "Think about what you're doing. No one will believe you." After she left, the nurse checked Marshall's vitals. "Your brother's been in the waiting room since they brought you in. Would you like to see him?" Marshall nodded, grateful. At least one person in this world was on his side. Reed entered a few minutes later, his face tight with worry. "Jesus, Marshall. What happened?" "Dina pushed me over the railing." Reed's expression darkened. "I knew it. That woman's poison. Blair's telling everyone I was drunk and fell." "That's bullshit. I was with you. You hadn't touched a drop." Marshall closed his eyes briefly. "Doesn't matter. It's my word against theirs. We need to file a police report. That's assault. And say what? That my 65-pound mother-in-law overpowered me and threw me over a railing? With no witnesses willing to back me up." Marshall shook his head. "They've already controlled the narrative." Reed paced the small room. "You gonna let her do this to you?" Marshall looked out the window at the Portland skyline, the same view he'd seen before falling. A cold clarity was settling over him, replacing the confusion and hurt. "They think I'm done? Good. I'll let them. What does that mean?" "It means I'm done playing their game by their rules." The next few days passed in a blur of doctors, pain medication, and physical therapy. Blair visited briefly, always with her mother, both of them performing concerned roles for the hospital staff while subtly pressuring Marshall to confirm the accident story he neither confirmed nor denied, simply watching and listening as they spun their tale. Each lie, each manipulation, was another piece of ammunition he stored away. When the doctor suggested 2 more weeks of inpatient rehabilitation, Marshall declined. Against medical advice, he checked himself out after 1 week, his legs still in a cast, his head still throbbing with occasional pain. "You sure about this?" Reed asked as he helped Marshall into his truck. "You could use the recovery time." "I need to be clear-headed," Marshall replied. "And I need to start working." "Working on what?" Marshall stared straight ahead. "On remembering everything." Reed's apartment was small but functional, located on the outskirts of Portland in a working-class neighborhood far from the sleek downtown high-rise Marshall had shared with Blair. The spare bedroom became Marshall's temporary home and war room. Each day, while Reed was at his mechanic shop, Marshall sat at a small desk, writing. Every slight, every manipulation, every lie Blair and Dina had ever told, he documented it all. Dates, times, witnesses, if any. He was building a case, meticulously cataloging the years of emotional abuse he'd endured. The clarity that had begun in the hospital sharpened with each passing day. Looking back, Marshall could see the pattern that had been invisible when he was inside it. How Blair had systematically isolated him from friends. How Dina had undermined his confidence at every turn. How they'd both made him feel that their approval was something he needed to earn but never could. "What's all this?" Reed asked one evening, gesturing to the growing pile of notebooks. "Evidence," Marshall replied. "I've been blind for too long." Reed picked up a notebook, flipping through pages of Marshall's tight, precise handwriting. "You're going to use this for the divorce?" Marshall took the notebook back, adding it to the stack. "Eventually. But first, I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." "And what's that?" "2 sociopaths who've been gaslighting me for years." Reed sat on the edge of the bed. "What are you planning, Marshall?" Marshall didn't answer immediately. The plan forming in his mind was still nebulous, but its outline was becoming clearer each day. "I'm going to give them exactly what they expect from me." "Which is what?" "A broken man they can continue to manipulate." Marshall closed the notebook he'd been writing in. "Blair called yesterday. She wants me to come home." "And you're going?" Marshall nodded. "It's time to start the next phase." "I don't like this," Reed said, concern etching lines around his eyes. "Those women are toxic. You should stay away from them, hire a lawyer, get a divorce." "A divorce would be too easy on them," Marshall said, his voice flat. "They'd spin it to make me look like the villain again. Blair would get everything, and Dina would keep pulling the strings." He shook his head. "No, I need to play this differently." Reed studied his brother for a long moment. "This isn't like you, Marshall. You've always been the reasonable one, the guy who walks away from a fight." "Maybe that's the problem," Marshall replied. "Maybe I should have fought back years ago." The next day, Marshall called Blair and told her he was ready to come home. Her relief was palpable, though not for the reason she assumed. She thought he was capitulating. He knew he was advancing. Before leaving Reed's apartment, Marshall took his brother aside. "I need you to trust me on this." Reed looked troubled. "Just promise me you won't do anything stupid." "I promise I won't get caught doing anything stupid," Marshall replied with a grim smile. Back at the downtown high-rise, Blair greeted him with a performance of wifely concern. She'd prepared his favorite meal, arranged his prescriptions on the nightstand, even bought him a new robe for comfort during his recovery. Marshall accepted it all with quiet gratitude, playing the role of the chastened husband. He apologized for causing a scene at the baby shower, admitted that his balance might have been affected by medication he'd taken earlier, a lie, but one that gave Blair and Dina partial vindication without admitting to drunkenness. "I'm just glad you've come to your senses," Blair said as she helped him settle onto the couch, his casted leg propped on a pillow. Her hand rested briefly on her pregnant belly. "We need to focus on the future now, on our family." Marshall nodded, the picture of contrition. "You're right. I've had time to think, and I realize how important stability is, especially with the baby coming." Blair's satisfied smile told him everything he needed to know. She believed she'd won. She believed he was broken. That night, after Blair had gone to bed, Marshall sat alone in the darkness of their living room. From a hidden pocket in his robe, he removed a small digital recorder. He pressed a button, and Blair's voice filled the silence. "We need to focus on the future now, on our family." Marshall smiled. Then he erased the test recording and set the device to standby. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. "I've scheduled an interview for you," Blair announced over breakfast 3 weeks after Marshall's return. She didn't look up from her tablet as she spoke. Marshall paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "An interview at Den Media. They need a facilities manager." Now she did look up, her expression a practiced mix of helpfulness and mild exasperation. "It's not construction, obviously, but it's something. We can't have you sitting around unemployed forever." Marshall nodded, careful to keep his expression neutral. "That's thoughtful of you." "Thanks. Don't thank me yet. You need to actually get the job." Blair returned to scrolling through her emails. "Wear your Navy suit, not the gray one. And for God's sake, get a haircut before Thursday." "Will do," Marshall said, obediently making a note on his phone. This was the pattern their interactions had fallen into since his return. Blair issuing directives, Marshall complying without complaint. On the surface, he'd become exactly what she wanted, a husband who knew his place and didn't challenge her authority. That IT was exhausting, this constant performance. But each time Blair spoke to him with that subtle edge of contempt, each time she made a decision without consulting him, Marshall added it to his mental tally. The recorder in his pocket captured it all. After breakfast, as Blair prepared to leave for work, the doorbell rang. She opened it to reveal Dina, immaculate as always in designer clothing, her silver hair styled in a perfect bob. "Mother, I didn't know you were coming by," Blair said, embracing Dina briefly. "Just thought I'd check on the invalid," Dina replied, her gaze moving past Blair to where Marshall sat at the dining table. "How's our patient today?" Marshall offered a meek smile. "Better, thanks. The physical therapy is helping." Dina entered, inspecting the apartment with sharp eyes. "Place could use a cleaning," she observed. "Blair, darling, you shouldn't have to come home to a mess after working all day." "I was going to tidy up today," Marshall said. Dina gave him a dismissive glance. "See that you do." Blair has enough on her plate without having to worry about housework. Marshall watched the interplay between mother and daughter, noting how Blair straightened her posture in Dina's presence, how she seemed to vibrate with a need for approval. "I found him a job interview," Blair told her mother. "At Den Media." Dina raised an eyebrow. "Really? Well, let's hope you can handle that level of responsibility, Marshall. It's a legitimate company, not some construction site." The insult slid off him. Once, it would have stung, made him defend his former profession. Now, he simply nodded. "I'll do my best." After Blair left for work, Dina lingered, moving around the apartment like she owned it. Marshall remained at the table, seemingly focused on the newspaper but acutely aware of her movements. "You know," Dina said suddenly, "Blair had such potential before she met you. She could have married a doctor, a lawyer, someone who could truly be her partner. Instead, she got this." She gestured vaguely at Marshall, the recorder in his pocket words silently, capturing every word. "I'm trying to be better," Marshall said softly. "For Blair and the baby." Dina scoffed. "Trying isn't enough, Marshall. It never has been. Some people just aren't cut out for success." She picked up her purse. "I have a lunch meeting. Tell Blair I'll call her later." After she left, Marshall sat motionless for several minutes. Then he retrieved the recorder from his pocket and played back the conversation. Dina's voice, clear and cruel, filled the silent apartment. Marshall smiled. Then he reached for his laptop and began composing an email. The recipient, Internal Revenue Service, Anonymous Tips Division. The subject, suspected tax fraud. The content, detailed information about Dina's side, businesses, the rental properties she managed off the books, the consulting fees she received in cash, the sales of artwork through her gallery that never seemed to appear on any tax forms. Marshall had learned about these activities gradually over the years, filing away each casual mention, each overheard phone call. Now, those fragments of information became weapons. After sending the email, Marshall made a phone call. "Caleb? It's Marshall Kane. Yeah, it's been a while. Listen, I heard you started your own contracting business. I was wondering if we could meet for a beer. I might be interested in some work if you've got it. That evening, when Blair returned from work, she found the apartment spotless and Marshall preparing dinner, his movements careful with his healing leg. You cooked? She asked, surprised. Thought you could use a break, Marshall replied. It's nothing fancy, just pasta. Blair set down her briefcase, studying him with a hint of suspicion. What's gotten into you? Marshall shrugged. Just trying to pull my weight. Like you said, you have enough on your plate. The suspicion in Blair's eyes faded, replaced by satisfaction. Well, it's about time. Maybe that fall knocked some sense into you after all. Marshall smiled thinly. Maybe it did. Later, in bed, Blair scrolled through her phone while Marshall pretended to read a book. His attention was actually on her passcode 6 digits that he committed to memory as her fingers moved across the screen. When Blair eventually fell asleep, Marshall carefully extracted himself from bed and limped to the living room. He found her purse, removed her phone, and used the memorized passcode to unlock it. Methodically, he went through her emails, texts, and call history, photographing anything of interest with his own phone. There were exchanges with someone named Saxon, messages that went well beyond professional, arrangements for meetings at hotels. There were emails about financial decisions Blair had made without consulting him, including transferring money from their joint account to a private one in her name only. Marshall returned the phone to her purse exactly as he'd found it. Then he added the new information to his growing collection of evidence. Day by day, piece by piece, Marshall was building his case. The mask of submission he wore concealed the cold, calculating mind beneath a mind focused entirely on the moment when the mask would finally come off. Marshall Kane. Caleb Royce stood from the booth with a grin, extending his hand. Man, you look like hell. Marshall shook his former co-worker's hand. Good to see you too, Caleb. They were meeting at a dive bar across town, far from anywhere Blair or her crowd might venture. Caleb had aged well since Marshall had last seen him filled out a bit, grown a neat beard, traded his work clothes for a casual but clearly expensive button-down and jeans. Heard about the accident, Caleb said as they settled into the booth. Rough break, man. You could say that. Marshall replied non-committally that a waitress appeared, and they ordered beers. When she left, Caleb leaned forward. So what's this about work? Last I heard, you were climbing the corporate ladder at Westridge Construction until they laid off half the supervisory staff, yeah? Marshall took a sip of his beer. Been trying to get back on my feet since then. Caleb nodded sympathetically. Market's tough right now. But hey, my business is doing well expanding. Actually, could always use someone with your experience. I'd appreciate that. Marshall paused. Though, there's a complication, which is, I need it off the books, at least for now. Seeing Caleb's raised eyebrow, Marshall added, it's a temporary situation. I'm in the middle of, let's call it financial restructuring. Understanding dawned on Caleb's face. Marital issues. Something like that. Caleb studied him for a moment, then nodded. Look, I owe you. You recommended me for my first management position, remember? I can bring you on as a consultant. Cash payments, no paperwork. Just until you get your situation sorted. Relief washed through Marshall. This was the first piece falling into place. I appreciate it more than you know. Don't mention it. Caleb raised his glass. To new beginnings. They clinked glasses, and Marshall felt a spark of his old self, the confident, capable man he'd been before Blair and Dina had systematically dismantled his self-worth. After finishing their drinks, Caleb walked Marshall to his car. Stop by the office tomorrow. I'll introduce you to the team, show you the projects we're working on. Thanks, Caleb. Really. As Caleb turned to leave, he paused. One more thing. Whatever you're planning, and I can see you're planning something, be careful. Divorce gets ugly fast. Marshall smiled grimly. I'm counting on it. The next day, Marshall told Blair he had a physical therapy appointment. Instead, he went to Caleb's office, a converted warehouse in the industrial district. The space hummed with activity designers at drafting tables, project managers on phones, a steady stream of contractors coming and going. Caleb gave him a tour, introducing him to key personnel. Marshall here is going to be consulting on some of our sustainability initiatives, he explained, the lie rolling smoothly off his tongue By the end of the day, Marshall had his first assignment reviewing plans for an eco-friendly housing development and an agreement for weekly cash payments. It wasn't much, but it was something Blair and Dina didn't control. That on his way home, Marshall's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, is this Marshall Kane? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. Yes. Who's this? Hollis Crane. I work with your wife at Evergreen PR. Marshall pulled into a parking lot, suddenly alert. What can I do for you, Hollis? It's more what I can do for you, she replied, her tone brisk. I have information you might find interesting. About Blair and a certain executive at our firm. Marshall's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of information? The kind that could be useful in a divorce proceeding. A short laugh. Or other forms of leverage. Why would you share that with me? Let's just say your wife isn't popular around the office. Especially with those of us she stepped on to get ahead. Hollis paused. Can we meet? They arranged to meet the following day at a coffee shop downtown. Marshall arrived early, securing a corner table with a view of the entrance. Hollis was punctual, a tall woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. She wore a sleek pantsuit and carried herself with the same confident air as Blair, but there was a hardness to her that Blair masked with charm. Marshall, she said as she sat down. No handshake, no pleasantries. Hollis, thanks for meeting me. She waved away his thanks. Let's be clear about something. I'm not doing this out of kindness. Your wife is blocking my promotion, and I want her gone. Marshall appreciated her directness. What exactly do you have? Hollis reached in her bag and withdrew a USB drive. Emails, text messages, hotel receipts. All documenting Blair's affair with Saxon Mead, our VP of Client Relations. He's married too, by the way. 2 kids. Marshall took the drive, turning it over in his hands. Why not take this to HR? Hollis snorted. Because Saxon runs HR effectively. Besides, affairs aren't technically against company policy unless there's a direct reporting relationship, which there isn't, on paper at least. She leaned forward. But this is still valuable information, don't you think? Extremely, Marshall agreed. What do you want in return? I want Blair distracted, destabilized, unable to focus on work long enough for me to secure the Lidhan Media account she's been courting. Hollis smiled thinly. Once I have that, I'll get the promotion she's been promised. Marshall considered her for a moment. I can arrange that. I thought you might. Hollis stood. One more thing. Saxon's wife, Jocelyn? She suspects something but hasn't been able to prove it. Might be another ally for you. After Hollis left, Marshall plugged the drive into his laptop. The evidence was comprehensive, explicit messages, arrangements for hotel rooms, photos taken from a distance showing Blair and a tall, distinguished-looking man entering a hotel together. He copied everything to his own secure storage, then pocketed the drive. 2 more pieces of the puzzle in place. Proof of the affair and another potential ally. That night at dinner, Blair chatted about her day, mentioning the Lidhan Media account. It's a huge opportunity, she said, excitement coloring her voice. If I land this client, the promotion to senior director is practically guaranteed. That's great, Marshall replied, his tone genuinely enthusiastic. When's the pitch meeting? Next Friday. I'm presenting to their entire executive team. Blair looked at him with surprise. You seem interested. Marshall smiled. Of course I am. This is important to you. Blair's expression softened slightly. Well, thanks. It's nice to have support for once. You always have my support, Marshall said, the lie bitter on his tongue. Later, as Blair slept, Marshall composed an email from an anonymous account. The recipient, Jocelyn Mead. The subject, your husband's activities. Attached was a single photo Saxon and Blair entering the hotel. The message was simple. If you want more information, contact this number. Marshall sent the email, then turned off his laptop. The pieces were moving into position. Soon, it will be time for the next phase. Blair's scream jolted Marshall awake. He lurched upright in bed to find her standing in the doorway. Phone clutched in her hand, face contorted with rage. What's wrong? He asked, though he had a good idea already. My car. Blair thrust the phone at him. On the screen was an email notification. Vehicle repossession notice. What? Why would they repossess your car? Marshall feigned confusion as he scanned the email. It says the payments are 3 months behind, but that's impossible. I set up automatic payments. Marshall handed back the phone. Could it be a mistake? Of course it's a mistake. Blair was already dialing the bank, pacing the bedroom in quick, angry strides. This is a disaster. I have the pitch meeting today. How am I supposed to get there without a car? I can drive you, Marshall offered. Blair shot him a venomous look. In what? Your pickup with a dented fender? I can't show up to Lidhan Media looking like some contractor's wife. The insult slid off him. Call a car service, then. That's not the point. Blair snapped. Then, into the phone. Yes, I'm holding for a manager. This is Blair Kane, and there's been a serious error with my account. Marshall got up and headed for the shower, hiding his satisfaction. The repossession was no mistake. He'd carefully redirected Blair's car payment emails to a folder she never checked, then canceled the automatic payments 3 months ago. The timing of the repossession on the day of her important pitch meeting was no coincidence, either by the time he emerged from the bathroom. Blair was in full crisis mode. She'd called her mother, who was on her way over. She'd also discovered that the earliest the bank could resolve the issue was next week. This is a nightmare, Blair moaned, now dressed in her pitch meeting outfit, but looking far from composed. Lidhan is expecting me in 2 hours, and I have no way to get there with all my presentation materials. Like I said, I can drive you, Marshall repeated calmly. Blair glared at him, then at the clock. Her shoulders sagged slightly. Fine, but you drop me off 2 blocks away, and you make sure your truck is clean. Of course, Marshall agreed, suppressing a smile. The drive to Lidhan Media headquarters was tense. Blair rehearsed her presentation points aloud while checking her makeup in the visor mirror every few minutes. Marshall drove carefully, playing the role of supportive husband to perfection. Stop here, Blair commanded when they were 2 blocks from the Lidhan building. Marshall pulled over. Good luck in there. You're going to do great. Blair didn't respond, already gathering her materials and checking her appearance one last time. She exited the truck without a word of thanks. Marshall watched her walk away, heels clicking on the pavement, spine straight with determination. Then he pulled back into traffic and drove to a nearby parking garage. From his bag, he retrieved a laptop and logged into a secure email account. The email he sent to Lidhan Media CEO contained selected portions of Hollis's evidence, nothing explicit, but enough to raise serious questions about Blair's professional judgment and ethics. He included just enough details about the evergreen PR pitch to make it clear this wasn't a random attack. Task complete. Marshall closed the laptop and checked his watch. He had another appointment to keep. Across town, in an upscale coffee shop in the Pearl District, Jocelyn Meade waited nervously. She was younger than Marshall had expected, with a natural beauty that required little enhancement. She wore minimal makeup and simple but expensive clothing, the uniform of old money, not the showy displays Blair favored. Mrs. Meade, Marshall said as he approached her table. Thank you for meeting me. Jocelyn's eyes widened slightly as she took in his appearance. You're not what I expected. I get that a lot, Marshall replied, sitting across from her. You said you have information about my husband. Her voice was steady, but her fingers twisted the napkin in her lap. Are you a private investigator? No. Marshall met her gaze directly. I'm Blair Kane's husband. Comprehension dawned on Jocelyn's face, followed by a flush of embarrassment. Oh, I see. I have evidence that our spouses are having an affair. Marshall continued, getting straight to the point. I'm planning to use this evidence in divorce proceedings. I thought you might want to know. Jocelyn was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she laughed a short, bitter sound. I've suspected for months. Saxon isn't exactly subtle. But evidence, that's what I've been missing. I can provide that, Marshall said. But first, I need to know what you intend to do with it. Jocelyn's expression hardened. I intend to take him for everything he's worth. The house, the cars, the investment accounts. Most importantly, custody of our children. Marshall nodded slowly. Here was a woman after his own heart, not seeking reconciliation or understanding, but justice. Revenge, even. In that case, he said, I think we can help each other. They talked for an hour, comparing notes, forming a plan. Jocelyn had financial information about Saxon that could be useful to Marshall. Marshall had communications evidence that would be devastating in Jocelyn's custody case. As they prepared to leave, Jocelyn asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. Why are you doing this? Why not just divorce Blair quietly? Marshall considered his answer carefully. Because quiet isn't enough. Not after what they've done. Jocelyn nodded, understanding in her eyes. When do we move forward? Soon, Marshall promised. I'll contact you when everything's in place. Back at the apartment, Marshall arrived to find Dina and Blair in heated conversation. They fell silent as he entered, both turning to look at him with nearly identical expressions of suspicion. How did the pitch go? He asked innocently. It didn't, Blair spat. Lidhan canceled at the last minute. Some emergency board meeting. Marshall arranged his features into a mask of concern. That's disappointing. Can you reschedule? Their CEO said they'd be in touch. Blair replied, her tone making it clear she didn't expect them to call. Strange timing, Dina remarked, her sharp eyes fixed on Marshall. First the car, now this. Marshall shrugged. Bad luck comes in threes, they say. What's next, I wonder? The answer came the following morning, when Dina called the apartment in a panic. The IRS is auditing all my businesses. They just showed up at the gallery with a warrant. Blair rushed to her mother's side, leaving Marshall alone in the apartment. He used the opportunity to continue his preparations, transferring money from their joint account to a separate one in Reed's name, gathering important documents, making arrangements with Caleb for more steady work. That evening, Blair returned looking haggard. Mother's a wreck, she reported. They're going through everything: tax returns, bank statements, client records. That sounds stressful, Marshall commented. Anything I can do to help? Blair shook her head distractedly. No, she has her accountant handling it. She collapsed onto the couch. God, everything's falling apart at once. The car, the Lidhan account, now this. It'll pass, Marshall said soothingly. Things always do. Blair looked at him with narrowed eyes. You're awfully calm about all this. Marshall kept his expression neutral. Panicking won't help, will it? I suppose not. Blair studied him for a moment longer, then sighed. I need a drink. While she was in the kitchen, Marshall slipped his recorder from his pocket and checked that it was still functioning. The final phase was approaching, and he needed everything in perfect working order for what came next. The Roswell Charity Gala was Portland's premier social event of the season. Hosted at the same rooftop restaurant where Marshall had been pushed months earlier, it brought together the city's elite for an evening of performative generosity and social climbing. AS Evergreen PR's rising star. Blair had secured a spot as an organizer, using her connections to arrange sponsorships and media coverage. The event would be her re-entry into Portland's social scene after the setbacks of recent weeks. You need to rent a tuxedo, Blair informed Marshall over breakfast 3 days before the gala. Nothing off the rack. Go to Norris on 5th, they'll fit you properly. Marshall nodded agreeably. Of course. Anything else I should know for the evening? Just follow my lead, smile when appropriate. And for God's sake, don't talk about construction. Blair barely looked up from her tablet. The guest list includes the mayor, 2 state senators, and CEOs from half the Fortune 500 companies in the Northwest. Sounds important, Marshall said mildly. It is important, Blair snapped. This is my chance to rebuild after the Lidhan disaster. So please, try not to embarrass me. Marshall smiled. I wouldn't dream of it. The night of the gala arrived with perfect weather-clear skies, a gentle breeze, the city lights twinkling below the rooftop venue. Marshall stood before the mirror in their bedroom, adjusting his bow tie. The tuxedo fit impeccably, accentuating his broad shoulders and the muscle he'd regained working with Caleb's crew. Blair appeared in the doorway, resplendent in a deep blue gown that complemented her now prominent pregnancy. She was due in less than a month, a fact she leveraged for sympathy and attention at every opportunity. You clean up nicely, she remarked, sounding almost surprised. So do you? Marshall replied, meaning it despite everything. Blair had always been beautiful, it was her soul that had turned ugly. They took a car service to the venue, Blair obsessively checking her phone for updates from the event coordinator. Marshall sat quietly beside her, mentally reviewing his plan one last time. The restaurant had been transformed since Marshall had last seen it. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary rigging, casting warm light over elegantly arranged tables. A stage had been erected at one end, featuring a podium and a massive screen for the charity presentation. As they entered, Marshall noted the exact spots where everything had happened months before, where he'd stood when Blair humiliated him, where Dina had grabbed his hair, where he'd fallen over the railing. The memories should have made him anxious. Instead, they strengthened his resolve. "Marshall," Dina approached, air-kissing Blair before turning to him. "How good of you to come support your wife's event." "Wouldn't miss it," Marshall replied with a practiced smile. Dina looked harried, her usual polish slightly diminished. The IRS audit had taken its toll, according to Blair. They'd already found numerous discrepancies and had frozen several of Dina's accounts. "Mother, is everything set up for my presentation?" Blair asked, glancing toward the stage. "Yes, darling. The technician tested everything this afternoon. It's all ready to go." Marshall suppressed a smile. The technician, actually an acquaintance of Reed's who owed him a favor, had indeed tested the equipment and made a few additional arrangements at Marshall's request. As guests continued to arrive, Marshall circulated through the crowd, playing the part of the supportive husband. He shook hands, made small talk, and kept a careful eye on the time. Blair's presentation was scheduled for 8:30 p.m. Following dinner and the initial charity appeals, at 8:25, Marshall excused himself from a conversation and made his way toward the back of the venue. From his pocket, he removed a small device and pressed a button. A confirmation text appeared on his phone screen seconds later. "Ready when you are." Marshall returned to his assigned table just as Blair was being introduced. She ascended the stage gracefully, her pregnancy adding a maternal glow that had the audience immediately sympathetic. "Good evening, distinguished guests," Blair began, her professional smile dazzling under the lights. "It's my honor to be here tonight representing Evergreen PR and our commitment to the Portland Children's Foundation." As she spoke, Marshall noticed the small remote that had been placed at his seat, exactly as arranged. He picked it up casually, concealing it in his palm. "Before I introduce our keynote speaker," Blair continued, "I'd like to share a brief video highlighting the Foundation's incredible work over the past year." She gestured toward the screen behind her. The lights dimmed. Blair stepped to the side of the stage, her practiced smile still in place. Marshall pressed the remote's button. Instead of the charity video, the screen illuminated with a very different image. Blair at their dining table, speaking to Dina. "He's so pathetic since the accident." Blair's voice filled the silent room. "Follows me around like a puppy, desperate for approval." Gasps rippled through the audience. Blair froze mid-step, her mouth hanging open in shock. The video continued, cutting to another clip. Dina's voice now, clear and vicious. "Of course I pushed him. The idiot was making a scene at your shower. What was I supposed to do?" The screen split to show multiple images, screenshots of Blair's text with Saxon, bank statements showing transfers from the joint account, photos of Blair and Saxon entering a hotel, but a new clip began playing. Blair on the phone with someone, laughing. "The baby? Of course it's not Marshall's. Do you think I'd want a child with his genes? Saxon at least has a Harvard education." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Blair stood paralyzed on stage, her face drained of color. Across the room, Saxon Meade was being stared at by surrounding guests, his wife nowhere to be seen. Dina rushed toward the stage, frantically signaling to the technician to stop the video. But the technician, Reed's friend, had already disappeared. Marshall stood slowly, drawing all eyes to him as he moved calmly toward the stage. The room quieted as he approached the microphone. "For those who don't know me," he said, his voice steady, "I'm Marshall Kane, Blair's husband." He paused. "At least for now. What are you doing?" Blair hissed, finally finding her voice. Marshall ignored her, addressing the crowd. 6 months ago, I was pushed from the balcony of this very restaurant by my mother-in-law, Dina Harrow. I broke my leg and suffered a concussion. My wife and her mother told everyone I was drunk and fell. More gasps. More whispers. Marshall continued. Since then, I've discovered that my wife has been systematically lying to me about everything: our finances, her fidelity, even the paternity of her child. He gestured to the screen, which now showed DNA test results. As you can see, I am not the father of Blair's baby. That honor belongs to Saxon Meade, VP at Evergreen PR and, until recently, husband to Jocelyn Meade. Dina finally reached the stage, her face contorted with rage. "Security," she shouted. "Remove this man immediately." Two security guards moved toward the stage, but stopped when Marshall raised his hand. "Before you do that," he said calmly, "you might want to see this last clip." The screen changed again, showing Dina in what appeared to be her home office, speaking on the phone. "Listen to me, Robert," she said harshly. "I don't care what kind of relationship you want with Blair. You signed away your parental rights 20 years ago. You get nothing now that she's successful. Nothing." The video cut to a different clip. Dina again, this time berating an elderly man who stood with stooped shoulders. "You pathetic drunk. You think Blair wants anything to do with you after how you abandoned her? Stay away from my daughter, or I'll make sure you regret it." Marshall looked directly at Blair, whose shock had transformed into dawning horror. "That's your father, isn't it? The one your mother told you wanted nothing to do with you. The one she said was too drunk and irresponsible to be in your life." Tears streamed down Blair's face, her carefully constructed mask completely shattered. "Security," Marshall said, "I'll save you the trouble." He stepped away from the microphone and walked calmly toward the exit. As he passed Dina, she lunged at him, fingers clawed. "You bastard," she screamed, swinging wildly. Security intervened, restraining her as she continued to shout obscenities. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Marshall continued his dignified exit into the elevator. He turned back once to survey the chaos he'd created. Blair had collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Saxon was being confronted by several board members of his company. Dina struggled against the security guards, her face twisted with hate. Marshall stepped into the elevator, a weight lifting from his shoulders as the doors closed behind him. Outside the restaurant, a black van waited at the curb, engine running. Marshall approached it, tapping lightly on the passenger window. The door unlocked with a click. Inside sat Jocelyn Meade, elegant in a simple black dress. Beside her, strapped into a car seat, was an infant girl, Saxon, and Jocelyn's youngest daughter. "Is it done?" Jocelyn asked. Marshall nodded. "Completely. The DNA results. Displayed perfectly," Jocelyn confirmed. Saxon's face when he realized what was happening. She shook her head. "I've never seen him so frightened. And you have everything you need for the custody hearing. More than enough." Jocelyn's smile was satisfied. "The judge granted the emergency petition this morning. I have full custody of both children pending the final hearing, and Saxon is restricted to supervised visitation twice a month." "Good," Marshall said. "What about you? What happens next?" Marshall glanced back at the restaurant. "Now we move to the final phase." He directed the driver to a modest apartment building several miles away. As they pulled up, Reed emerged from the entrance, helping an elderly man with a cane. "Who's that?" Jocelyn asked. "Robert Harper," Marshall replied. "Blair's father. The man Dina has been keeping away from his daughter for decades." Robert looked nervously at the van as it stopped. Marshall got out and approached him. "Mr. Harper? I'm Marshall Kane, Blair's husband." The older man's eyes widened. "You're Marshall? Reed told me. He said he wanted to help me see my daughter." "That's right," Marshall confirmed. "There's something you need to see first, though. Something that will explain a lot." Inside the van, Marshall showed Robert selected clips from the videos that had just played at the gala. Dina's cruel dismissal of him, her lies to Blair about his abandonment. Robert wiped tears from his eyes. "All these years, I tried so hard to be part of her life. Dina always said Blair didn't want to see me. She lied," Marshall said simply. "To both of you. And now, will Blair see me now?" Marshall exchanged glances with Reed. "That depends on her. But at least now she knows the truth." They drove back toward the restaurant, timing their arrival for when the gala would be breaking up. Sure enough, guests were streaming out, many talking excitedly on phones. Others huddled in groups, discussing the evening's dramatic events. Blair emerged, supported by an event coordinator. Her makeup was streaked with tears, her elegant composure completely gone. When she saw the van and Marshall standing beside it, she froze. "What more do you want?" she asked, her voice raw. "Haven't you humiliated me enough?" "This isn't about humiliation, Blair," Marshall replied. "It's about truth." He gestured to Robert, who stood nervously behind him. "Do you recognize this man?" Blair stared at her father, confusion replacing anger on her face. From the video. That's your father," Marshall finished for her. "The man your mother told you abandoned you. The man who's been trying to contact you for 20 years. Robert stepped forward hesitantly. "Blair, my God, you look just like your grandmother." Blair's hand went to her mouth. "Mother said you were drunk, that you signed away your rights." "I had a drinking problem, yes," Robert admitted, "after your mother left me. But I never, ever signed away my rights to you. I've written letters, sent gifts, all returned. I tried calling, visiting Dina, always blocked me." Tears welled in Blair's eyes again. "I don't understand. Why would she do that?" "Control," Marshall said simply. "The same reason she's controlled every aspect of your life. The same reason she pushed me off that balcony when I threatened her authority." Blair looked from Marshall to her father, decades of certainty crumbling around her. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Then believe the evidence," Marshall said. He handed her a flash drive. "Everything is here, the videos, the recordings, the financial documents. Proof of what your mother has done to both of us." Blair took the drive automatically, her hand trembling. "And the baby? Is it true?" "It's not yours. DNA doesn't lie," Marshall said. "It's Saxon's child. I have the test results." Blair seemed to crumple inward, one hand going protectively to her belly. For a moment, Marshall almost felt sorry for her. "Almost. Why are you showing me all this?" Blair asked. "Why not just divorce me and be done with it?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," Marshall replied. "About your mother, about your father, about the life that was stolen from you." Robert took a tentative step toward his daughter. "Blair, I know this is a shock. I don't expect anything from you. But if you ever want to talk, I've waited 20 years for that chance." Blair looked at her father, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. Then she looked back at Marshall, her expression unreadable. "The divorce papers have already been filed," Marshall told her. "My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow. Given the evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct, I think you'll find it's in your best interest to agree to the terms." "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Blair said bitterly. "I learned from the best," Marshall replied. "You and your mother taught me how to play the long game." As if summoned by her name, Dina appeared at the restaurant exit, still flanked by security guards who were escorting her out. When she saw the tableau before her, Marshall, Blair, and Robert, she stopped short. "You," she snarled at Robert. "How dare you show your face here?" "Hello, Dina," Robert said calmly. "It's been a long time." Dina turned her fury on Marshall. "This is your doing. You planned all of this." "Yes," Marshall agreed simply. "I did." "Mother," Blair said, her voice different now, harder, colder. "Did you lie to me about my father?" Dina faltered, just for a moment before recovering. "Of course not. He's manipulating you. Can't you see that? Marshall has turned you against me, just like he planned." "Answer me," Blair insisted. "Did you keep my father from me? Did you return his letters, block his calls? I protected you." Dina snapped. "He was a drunk, a failure. He would have ruined your life, held you back just like Marshall has." The admission hung in the air between them. Blair stared at her mother, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Goodbye, Mother," she said finally, turning away. "Blair," Dina called after her. "Blair, come back here." But Blair was already walking away, Robert hesitantly following at a respectful distance. Dina rounded on Marshall, her face contorted with rage. "This isn't over. I'll destroy you for this." Marshall smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in years. "No, Dina, it is over. You have no power anymore, not over Blair, and certainly not over me." He turned and walked away, leaving Dina standing alone on the sidewalk. Her empire of manipulation finally crumbled to dust. 1 year of Marshall set his toolbox down on the partially constructed deck, wiping sweat from his brow as he surveyed the progress. The eco-home was taking shape, nicely, solar panels gleaming on the south-facing roof, reclaimed wood siding nearly complete on the east wall. "Looks good," Reed commented, joining him with 2 bottles of water. He handed one to Marshall. "Caleb called. Says the permits for the Madison Street project came through." Marshall nodded, taking a long drink. "That's 3 new builds this month. We might need to hire another crew." Reed grinned. Not bad for a company that didn't exist a year ago. Green Future Construction had been Marshall's idea, born from his work with Caleb and funded initially by the divorce settlement. The focus on sustainable building practices had quickly attracted attention in Portland's environmentally conscious market, and the business had grown faster than either brother had anticipated. "Have you seen this?" Reed pulled out his phone, showing Marshall a news article headline. "Harrow Gallery closes amid ongoing tax investigation." Marshall scanned the article. "Says here Dina's facing potential criminal charges." "Couldn't happen to a nicer person," Reed remarked dryly. Marshall handed back the phone without comment. He had stopped keeping tabs on Dina months ago, finding that his desire for revenge had been satisfied. Her financial empire was in ruins, her social standing destroyed. Justice, as far as he was concerned, had been served. "And what about Her Majesty?" Reed asked, using his nickname for Blair. "Last I heard, she was working entry-level at some small marketing firm in Seattle," Marshall replied. "The divorce crushed her professionally. No one would hire her after the scandal." Reed studied his brother's face. "Regrets?" Marshall considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "Not about exposing the truth. Sometimes I wonder about the baby, though." The child, a girl named Joy, had been born 2 weeks after the gala. Marshall had no legal connection to her, having been proven not to be the biological father. According to the updates he occasionally received from Jocelyn, Saxon had initially tried to deny paternity as well, but the DNA evidence was irrefutable. "Jocelyn says she's thriving," Marshall said. "She's walking now, starting to talk." Reed nodded. "And what about Blair's dad? Robert?" "They're building a relationship. Slowly. A lot of damage to undo." Marshall took another drink of water. "He's staying sober, which is good. I think having Blair back in his life gives him something to stay clean for." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hammering punctuated by the occasional whine of a power saw. Around mid-afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. Jocelyn Mead stepped out, elegant as always in simple, expensive clothing. In the years since their alliance had begun, she had transitioned from co-conspirator to friend. Using her portion of Saxon's assets, she had established a foundation supporting victims of domestic abuse with Marshall as a silent donor. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she called, making her way carefully across the construction site in her impractical shoes. "Just in time for a break," Marshall replied, setting down his hammer. "How's the foundation?" "Growing." Jocelyn smiled. "We just opened our 3rd shelter in Tacoma. The board voted to name it after you, by the way." Marshall shook his head. "I told you, no names. I don't need recognition." I know. We're calling it Phoenix House instead. Rising from the ashes and all that." They moved to the shade of a large oak tree, where a cooler of drinks awaited. Reed excused himself to check on another worker, leaving Marshall and Jocelyn alone. "I got a birthday card yesterday," Marshall said after a moment. "Blank. No return address." Jocelyn raised an eyebrow. "Blair. Has to be." He shrugged. "Not sure what message she's trying to send." "Maybe none," Jocelyn suggested. "Maybe it's just acknowledgement." Marshall nodded slowly. The card had stirred complex emotions, not regret. Exactly. But a certain wistfulness for what might have been in another life, with another version of Blair. "How's Joy?" he asked, changing the subject that Jocelyn's face softened. "Wonderful. Growing so fast. She has Saxon's eyes, but none of his arrogance, thank God." She hesitated. She asked about her mom sometimes. "What do you tell her?" "The truth, in simple terms. That her mommy lives far away, and that families come in all different shapes." Marshall nodded. "That's good. Kids deserve the truth, even when it's complicated." They talked a while longer about Jocelyn's foundation work, about Marshall's expanding business. As she prepared to leave, Jocelyn paused. You know, when we first met, I thought you were just out for revenge, she said. But it was more than that, wasn't it? Marshall considered her question. It started as revenge, he admitted. But somewhere along the way, it became about justice. About truth. Jocelyn nodded. Well, whatever it was, I'm grateful our paths crossed. After she left, Marshall returned to work, losing himself in the physical labor that had always centered him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the construction site, Reed approached again. Closing up for the day, he announced. Heading to O'Malley's for a beer, if you want to join. Marshall shook his head. Rain check. I've got some designs to finish for the Madison Street project. Reed studied him. All work and no play, brother. I play. Marshall protested mildly. Just on my own schedule. Reed clapped him on the shoulder. Fair enough. Don't stay up too late. Alone on the site, Marshall finished securing tools and materials before locking up. As he walked to his truck, a new model purchased with the first profits from Green Future. He paused to look back at the half-built home that a year ago. He had been broken physically from the fall, emotionally from years of manipulation. The man who had meekly accepted Blair's and Dina's treatment was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more clear-eyed. Someone who understood his own worth. In his pocket, Marshall's phone chimed with a text. A new client, referred by Caleb, wanting to discuss a potential project. Marshall smiled, tapping out a quick response before starting his truck. As he drove home through the gathering dusk, a line popped into his head, something he had thought the day of the gala, watching Dina and Blair's worlds collapse around them. They taught me how to fall. I taught them what it means to land hard. Marshall turned on the radio, the hint of a smile playing around his lips as he drove toward home, toward the future he had built from the ruins of his past.